Hi everyone, this is Kei Seto Kaiba back with another chess video. And so for this one, we're going to show the box method by using a rook checkmate. So this is a basic theoretical checkmate that most people learn just after they learn the queen checkmate. Now the queen and king versus king checkmate I've also shown in my other video. I'll put it in the video description. That video was about how to pre-move queen checkmate, which is a slightly more advanced version of it. But here, this is a regular checkmate with the rook. And so this is more so aimed at beginners, just learning the rules of chess, or maybe wanting a little extra step just to get a little more confidence entering the endgame. But this could also be good review for any level player, so it's still a useful video to take a look at. So here, first of all, we have to understand what is this box method that we're talking about. So basically, the chessboard is a very big place. It's got 64 squares on it, and this black king could really escape and run and flee very quickly. And if you don't really have a plan, it's very easy to get to the 50 move rule and then run into a draw, or somehow blow this game. That should always be a win for the side with the rook. And so because of that, there's a way to corral this king, and that's where this box method comes in handy. Now we're not going to show the exact most efficient checkmate here. We're just going to show how to use this box method to help corral this king, so it'll always get checkmated when done properly. So what the box method is if we notice, our rook, just like the queen, it controls a lot of squares. And this king, if you notice, it is in this little box here. Now to the right of the chessboard here, the king is always forever trapped. As long as this rook doesn't let the king escape, the king can never access a square like, say, b5 or c7, because quite frankly, it's on the other side of this little wall. So this rook's wall here, a lot of people call it kind of like a little force field. The king cannot get through because all of these squares here on this side are, sorry, not that one, on this side are controlled by the rook. And so what you have to do is you're going to make this box smaller and smaller, and eventually use that in coordination with your king to help push this king to the very edge of the chessboard or a corner, and then it'll be much easier to checkmate. So first we advance our king or rook, but we'll go with the king here. And we'll have the other king, try and step in closer. Because, again, this king wants to stay as very close to the center as possible. They want to avoid going to the edge of the chessboard if possible. And so now we just advance the rook. And of course, our rook is defended by our king, so it's completely safe here. And notice that our box is now slightly smaller. Now the king is only restricted to these few squares here. And so we just went down from 64 squares, at the very beginning, that the king could theoretically access if we had no plan whatsoever. And now this king is already restricted to just these, 20 squares here? So already we're making a lot of progress in restricting where this king can go. So now say the king moves somewhere. That's okay. We just slowly close the box. And so now we're going to go with rook e3. And when our rook was here, we controlled a few squares. But now that our rook is on this file, now we're just kind of pushing the king a little further right. And regardless where they go, we're always going to make this box ever so slightly smaller. And of course, if the king were to go further this way, like king to g4, then we'll just move the rook here and we'll restrict it in the same way. But let's say the king will go the other way. Let's say the king goes with here, king f5. Well, now our rook is actually pretty ideally placed, so whenever that happens, you just bring the king closer. And so with king f3, now the king is actually controlling some valuable squares here, and in congruence with the rook, now this king is very restricted. Now this box here is just these squares. So we take a look at this here, get rid of these. We notice that this king here is now down to only 12 possible squares it can shuffle between, which is a lot less than it had before. So now we have king g5, trying to escape. Maybe they can get something like this. And so here we have rook to e5 check. Again, we're just pushing the king here. That way its box will be even smaller. What we're trying to do in this case is push it to this upper right quadrant. Could be in any part of the chessboard. As long as you're making progress and restricting the king, you should be making progress and, on the right path here. So we have king to f6. Now, if the king was to go here, it looks like they're getting away, and we're about to show a little bit later in this. We'll show it a little closer to here what would actually happen. But this is actually a checkmate in 2. What's then going to end up happening there is we'll just shuffle the rook somewhere. The king will be forced to move, and then we'll have a checkmate. But we'll show that, instead of just arrows, we'll actually put it up a little later. So here, let's say they play the better defense, say king at f6. And now we just advance our king further. And again, we're making progress. This king is now very restricted. This rook cuts off a lot of the king's squares. And so the king is now just limited to just these 9 possible squares it can go to. It's a very small box, and we're just going to keep making it smaller and smaller and then deliver checkmate. So they go king to f7. We go king f5, king g7, and now we have rook e7 check. And now I'll show a variation here, which is very similar, just like before. What happens if they go here? And so instead of arrows, I'll show what actually happens if instead of the better defense is go like king f8. But let's say they don't do that. Let's say they go king to h6. This actually loses faster, because now all we have to do is the rook is controlling this, so the king can't go to these squares. Our king is controlling these squares here. And so we notice that this king is very, very restricted. It's really only got one square to go to, and that is h5 in this case. And so because of that, all we have to do is shuffle this rook somewhere. Doesn't really matter where. It could be here, could be here. As long as we keep it on this same rank, then the king is still going to be cut off. And once that happens, they're forced into a move. So we're going to play rook f7 just for argument's sake, king f5, and then we just move this way. And because the king was in Zugswang, this compulsion to move, they had to move, and now we have this checkmate on the edge of the board. But let's say they play the better defense. Let's say they play king to f8 instead of getting checkmated so quickly. We play king to f6. And now notice just how small the king's box is. Now it's only down to 3 possible squares it can shuffle between. So here they go king g8, forced move, only possible move they had. And now very similar to what we did before, we were shuffling. Now we're very, very close to checkmate, so we have to figure just how can we pass the tempo in such a way that now this king is forced to move in some way. So as long as we keep the as long as we keep the rook on this rank here, then we'll basically be passing the tempo here. So we'll just go rook to d7. Now, again, if they go king to f8, we just have a very simple checkmate here. But in this case, rook d8 checkmate. And so here we're going to have the king play king h8, a little bit more stubborn. That way this is not checkmate because the king will run. And so getting rid of the arrows here, we play king g6. And now, because the king can't go here and there's no other edge of the board, there's no other file after h here. So now the king is forced to king g8. And now we get the nice rook to d8 checkmate. And this is a very common pattern with the rook. These 3 squares are cut off by our king. We also have king opposition because it's 1 square away. And then because these squares are cut off, the rook delivers this checkmate, very similar to kind of like a back rank idea. And so this is how you use the box method for a rook checkmate. If you want a little bit more advanced version of how to do this with a queen, but a lot more quicker under time pressure, you can check the how to pre-move a queen checkmate video. And so I hope this rook checkmate was helpful for everyone. It's a very basic checkmate, but it's a very good one to know. Approximately 1/6 of all rook endgames, 1/6 of all endgames are rook endgames, and that's pretty high, really. And the reason why is because these rooks start in the corner of the chessboard of the game. It's usually one of the last pieces to develop, so it only makes sense that usually you get to an endgame where some side usually has a rook. And so it's a very common checkmate, but it's a very useful one to know because it's a very common situation that you might find yourself in. So just having the confidence to know you can checkmate with just one rook is a really big thing, at least when you're first starting out. So I hope everyone found this useful, and so I'll see you. Bye, everyone.